Welcome.
What's up guys, ThePartyKnife here. Now due to popular request, we're gonna go through each of the 9 out of the 16 classes that have received changes to their talents in the Big Balance Beta. And as we go through them from Kruber to Sienna in chronological order, we're also quickly gonna cover, not super in depth, but just go through what are the weapon changes to the ranged weapons specifically, which aren't that significant, like they're fairly easy to explain and go over quickly. But first, before we start the video and do that, I have had to say thank you first to everyone. Like the support in my most recent update video was just overwhelming. It's always weird somehow when you spend 70 hours making one video, Kata Guide for example, for FOV, and literally 70 hours of grinding work, and then you have this other video that the better part of an afternoon, like maybe 5 or 6 hours of work, and it already has like double the views and more view time, and I don't know how many more comments, and so many of those comments were really helped a lot. As you can see here, this picture was the last I had taken. This is less than a month ago, so when I left my mom's house. So anyways, don't want to go full sad mode, but just wanted to say thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And just because, to lighten up the mood before we get started, here's a picture of my previous dog as a puppy, because god damn, that's cute. No, anyways, let's get to the video. Starting off with Kruber, who among other things have received a buff to his handgun, and these changes also apply to Bardin's handgun. Now the reload time has been reduced from 2 seconds to 1.5 seconds, as well as receiving the same amount of cleave as a crossbow, and on top of that you now have an ammo capacity of 16 shots rather than 12. Moving on to the blunderbuss, which has also received a slight buff in the form of its ammo capacity, which has been increased from a total of 12 shots to a total of 16. Which brings us to the mercenary himself, which has received 2 different changes to his ultimate talents. The first being a nerf to his walk it off, which now only gives 25% damage reduction instead of 40, and then a change to the overall talent ready for action, which now instead only gets 20% cooldown reduction instead of 40, but now it doesn't actually remove the amount of health you get from the ulti. And all in all, what this change does is sort of equalize the value of his 3 talents. Moving on to the Huntsman and his Empire longbow, which has received sort of mechanical changes to the way it aims. Now the first change is regarding the amount of time you have to aim before the zoom takes place. Before it was 0.4 seconds, which was equal to the amount of time it would take to charge up your bow to the max. But now it takes 2 seconds before you actually get a zoom, which means you can use the fully charged attack without actually zooming in, and at the same time, once you actually apply the zoom, then it's gonna stay zoomed in as long as you're still aiming, which I assume is in order to prevent this zooming in and out in between attacks. Now the second change it has received is regarding your movement speed while you're aiming, whereas before you had to stop completely in order to fully charge an attack up, whereas now you actually still have 25% movement speed while aiming, which means you don't have to stand completely still to do fully charged attacks. Moving on to his talents, 2 of them have been reworked. The first being Maim, which now is called Keep It Coming, and essentially causes every 3rd ranged hit to cost the next shot to consume no ammo, which essentially sounds as if 1 in 4 shots is gonna cost no ammo, but in fact it's 1 in 3, because the 4th shot that you take, which then costs no ammo, assuming you hit the target, still applies as number 1 in the next cycle. In other words, for all intents and purposes, assuming you hit your shots, then 1 in 3 shots is gonna cost no ammo. Moving on, the Talent Master Huntsman has been changed into Tough Hide. Now, what it does now is every time you kill a special or elite enemy, it reduces your damage taken by 10%, which then stacks up to 4 times, 1 stack of which will be received every time you kill a special or an elite, and another stack of which will be consumed every time an enemy successfully attacks you. Moving on to the Foot Knight, we got quite some significant changes to his talent pool. which I think was a great thing. Now, as you may or may not know, the Foot Knight was definitely ranked among my least played heroes. And one might get the sense that the exact same thing was true regarding the whole community, which really shouldn't be the case when you consider he's one of the coolest looking heroes in the game. And although I personally still feel like his ulti is slightly too clunky, we're hopefully gonna see more of him, because he's received a total of 6 different changes to his talent pool, all of which revolve around his level 20 and 25 talents. The first being Rock of the Reichland, which now doubles the range of your aura protective presence whilst also granting 20% block cost reduction. Then we got That's Bloody Teamwork, which now grants 5% extra damage reduction per nearby ally, instead of just granting 5% in total, which I think is a really nice change to promote team play. Unlike Tag Team, which is gonna turn any resemblance of team play into a competition for who can hug Kruber the most. And I like it, because essentially what it does is the ally closest to Kruber receives 50% damage reduction, as well as an increase in power equal to 10%, but at the cost of your protective presence no longer affecting the rest of the team, although it still applies to yourself. Which brings us to It's Hero Time, which is actually a really interesting talent that resets the cooldown of your ulti every time one of your allies gets incapacitated, and although I haven't done any testing on this yet, I assume that means whenever they're either hit by a disabler or whenever they go down. But moving on to boxing, we got Counterpunch. Blocking an attack removes the stamina cost from pushing for an entire second, allowing you to do this. But anyways, moving on to the final talent change for the Foot Knight, we got Inspire Action, which increases the cooldown regeneration of everyone's career ability by 100% for half a second. In other words, every time you stagger an elite enemy, everyone on your team will regenerate half a second extra on their career ability over the course of a full second. And with that said, I think we're all ready to rock on to the brutally barbaric brawler known as Bardin, whom first of all has received a similar change to that of the blunderbuss, which is an increase in ammo capacity, although only from 14 to 16 rather than from 12 to 16. And the reason I have more than 16 ammunition here is only due to the range of Bardin's passive ability. Which brings us to Bardin's second ranged weapon balance change, which regards the throwing axes and reads as follows. Increased monster and berserker damage by 30%, which confused the hell out of me for 2 reasons. Since there's only really 2 types of damage in the game, there's the base damage and then there's the armor damage, both of which are calculated based on the attack's initial base damage and or armor damage, which are then run through an equation which takes into account your raw power, your power properties, any other buff, and so on, in order to arrive at a final number, which will be your damage output versus that type of minion. Which means damage versus monsters or berserkers specifically would have to be applied after this calculation, so it only applied to those specific enemy types. But what that also means is if you were trying to calculate a breakpoint and you were hitting the dummy, then I assume the dummy would not receive that 30%, and thus it would be super confusing to figure out, even if you knew the HP of the minion, how much damage you were actually going to deal. And to add on top of that confusion, a close friend of mine also claimed that it only applied to either the berserkers or the monsters. But since this is an update video, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to leave you with more research is needed, as we move on to the Rage of Bardin's talent changes. The first of which I would consider the best thing to happen to Bardin since the invention of the trampoline. And it is of course Field Rations. Killing a special has a 50% chance to drop an ale that increases attack speed and damage reduction by 3% for 300 seconds, aka 5 minutes, and stacks up to 3 times. Which in my opinion is such a brilliant change for one single reason. It is so memeable, right? The fact that throughout a run, you and your team are gonna stop to drink ale seems like such a refreshing addition to the game, and I'm already looking forward to the clips of people being in a clutch and going, "Hold on a second guys, ah, that was good. Sorry, just had to chuck that ale first, ain't gonna leave that lying on the ground, that's heresy. Now shut up elf, I said I'm on my way." But anyways, let's move on to Scavenger, which does exactly what it's always done, except now it spawns at your feet, instead of at the location where you killed the enemy minion. Yay! But for real though, a nice change that makes this talent way more reliable. Moving on to Exuberance, Bardin now takes 30% less damage from the back. Ha! In your face, shade. And the headshots also reduce damage taken by 30% for 5 seconds, which does pretty much exactly what it says and seems like a really good defensive trait. last but not least, we got a change to his leftmost ulti talent, which I unfortunately forgot to hold my mouse over, but it reads, allies inside of Bardin's smoke gain 8% increased attack speed and recovers 3 temporary health every second, which when multiplied with the duration of the smoke bomb, which is 10 seconds, means you can recover a total of 30 temporary HP for each person standing in the smoke. And all in all, I really like all of the new talent changes to the Ranger Bardin. So let's move on to the nugget of gold, better known as the Breaker of Iron. The Ironbreaker, which has received 1 ranged weapon change and 3 total talent changes. Now, the ranged weapon change is to the Drakefire pistols, which has received 2 buffs, the first being a reduction to the amount of overheat generated by the shotgun blast, equal to roughly speaking 33%, as well as a reduction to the reduction of the weapon's dodge range, actually a complete removal, not just a reduction, going from minus 15% in dodge range to 0%, greatly increasing the weapon's mobility. And as for his talents, they're actually really interesting, which is something I never thought I would say about the Ironbreaker. Now, starting off with the least interesting of the 3, we got the Rune-Etched Shield. Blocking an attack increases the power of Bardin and his nearby allies by 2% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times for a total of 10% extra power. Which is fine, I guess. But moving on to Rising Pressure, which is an amazing talent and reads, Drakefire damage increases from minus 80% to 120% and ranged attack speed reduces from 100% to minus 150% depending on overcharge, and removes the normal overcharge slowdown. Now, as always, Fatshark have chosen to word this talent description in just about the most confusing way that's humanly possible. And I'll explain why momentarily, but for now, I think we should take a look at what this talent actually does to the use of the Drakefire pistols, as I shall now demonstrate. And as you can see, it's a lot of fun. But as you probably realized by now, the gist of it all is that you're gonna start out attacking super fast, but dealing almost no damage, and as your overcharge increases, you'll eventually attack really slow, but at a much higher damage. And I apologize, but I just have to mention real quickly why this description is so horrible, so let's read through it one more time. Drakefire damage increases from minus 80%. Wait, let's stop right there. Are we giving enemies health by shooting them? No, of course not. It's not minus 80% when you're talking percentages. Like, I get that it's 80% less than 100%. That means it's 20%. Had you mentioned that the Drakefire weapon received a buff of minus 80%, that would then change into a buff of plus 120%, then it would make sense. Because literally what this description says, word for word, is that you start out by dealing negative 80% of your damage, and then it increases until you deal an extra 20%. When what it should say is that you start out dealing 20% damage, and then it increases until you deal 220% damage. But then to make it even more confusing in the bottom part at the attack speed, then it starts out by saying that range attack speed is reduced from 100%, which is true, logical, and makes sense, but they switch it around because 100% in terms of the damage was actually 0%, but now they go backwards and now they say that 100% is actually 100%, and then it's reduced to minus 150%, which just makes no sense at all whatsoever, since if we relate it to the only other minus we have, which is minus 80%, which was a reduction of 80%, then that still means that we have a reduction of 150% of our attack speed, which literally means that we're not attacking. Like you can't have less than 0% attack speed. It makes no sense at all whatsoever. But what they meant to say is that your attack speed is roughly speaking 3.5 times slower when you're at max overcharge than it is when you initially start attacking. I measured the first shot to take roughly 16 milliseconds between the first and the second, and at max overcharge I measured it just roughly around a second. Now don't get me wrong, I love the actual talent, but Fatshark, please get a grip on your descriptions. But anyways, let's stop being salty and move on to the next amazing talent, which is called Vengeance. And it does something quite amazing. Periodically generates stacks of rising anger every 7 seconds while Grumnils is active. When Grumnils is removed, gain 8% attack speed per stack of Rising Anger, and although it's not mentioned, I tested it and it caps out at 5 stacks, which is a total of 40% increase to your attack speed, which is a pretty significant amount, I would say. And all in all, I really like this talent because it rewards not getting hit with an aggressive buff. And all in all, despite the talent description, I really like the changes to the Ironbreaker. Hey, what's going on guys, ThePartyKnife here, coming at you with the new camera angle for the first time ever on my primary monitor rather than on my secondary or my tertiary. But other than that, just wanted to say that it seems like you guys really prefer the format of like 15, maximum 20-minute videos when it comes to these things. So as a test at least, I decided to do the Elf and Saltspire and Sienna tomorrow in tomorrow's video. Now I was originally gonna do half of the Elf, or in this case the Handmaiden, and then let the Shade be tomorrow, but then I had a blue screen of death, and when I restarted my PC, 2 of my monitors weren't working, and I had to reinstall the software for my graphics card and the software for all of my screens. So essentially the gist of it all is I was slightly delayed, so that's gonna be in tomorrow's video. We're gonna cover all 3 of them, and instead I'm gonna leave you with this. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why you should never let Sienna overcharge in the water. And as always, I love you guys, stay awesome, peace out!